Two big stories for you today. You know what the first one is. It has to do with the Fed rate cut. The second story is about how housekeeping is becoming a $100,000 a year job. I break down business news for high income households. This is The Will Whiten Show. So first, as a reminder, this show is available in podcast format. I will put links in the description. It is available where all podcasts are. This is great if you like to listen to the show on the go. If you prefer the audio version, check it out. So for the first article, this is from CNBC. It says, what this Fed rate cut means for your credit, mortgage, auto loan, student debt, and savings account. These are all things that are important. This brings it back to us. What does the Fed rate cut mean to us? So, of course, the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates by 25 basis points on Wednesday, today. The interest rates, the Fed funds rate, which it's talking about, was targeted between 4 and 4.25%. Now it's 3.75% to 4%. And this is the range in which other banks charge each other to lend money to each other overnight. So it's not 3.25% to 4% for one night, but that's the annualized rate. And so that's how banks lend each other money. That's the rate at which banks will lend each other money. And that then subsequently impacts every other interest rate that is going to be controlled by a banking product, namely, like the title said, credit cards, mortgages, auto loans, student debt. The Fed chair, Jerome Powell, also indicated that whether there's going to be a cut in December is quite a toss-up. It is not decided. A lot of market spectators were suggesting there was a 90% chance of a rate cut in December going into today, but he indicated that that is not the case. He made it sound more 50-50, and so we'll see what happens in December. Now, let's go down through each of these areas to see how they can impact you. The first is credit cards. So obviously, I would avoid ever having a credit card balance, especially if you're making $250,000 a year. It's just not worth it. I don't see the point. To me, it's an extra headache. But if you do have a credit card balance and you're paying interest on that balance, then that interest rate will probably get a bit better. Those interest rates are typically floating. Now, they can be egregiously high, so maybe the benefit won't be too much, but there will be some benefit to that. But at the end of the day, I would say if you can avoid it, especially if you have an high income, I would avoid it. I would avoid credit card interest. Realistically, you can go without a credit card altogether. But if you do choose to have a credit card and you happen to have a balance, then things are going to get a bit better for you. Now going on to mortgages, we'll spend a little bit of time with this. So this will also impact mortgage rates. Now, regardless of what your income is, it's much more likely that people will have a mortgage because houses are expensive. They've always been expensive. Obviously, post-COVID, they became way more expensive. And this can make houses more affordable. There have been reports about housing inventory, which has gone up dramatically. We are no longer in the days, the dark days of COVID, when it was so difficult to find a house for sale. And then when you went, there'd be a line of people. My wife and I did look for houses a little bit during that time. And I remember going to an open house and we were tripping over people. People were everywhere. And we only looked at a handful of houses, but we said, wow, people are desperate. And the tricks that realtors wanted to come up with to try and differentiate your offer, realtors were suggesting that people write letters, kind of a personal appeal, oh, we're a young family, we're really, we'd really love our first home, or, oh, we're, an older couple that's looking to downsize, please, can you help us, trying to do a personal appeal. We had a realtor suggest to us that we put the house's address number in our offer number. I'm not kidding. This was a serious suggestion. So whatever it was probably a 3-digit house number, 305. And so if the offer was going to be 500,000. She said, make it 500,305. And because she said that it's a mental trick and people have the house number on their mind. And when they see that in the offer, maybe they'll be more drawn to that offer. There were some wild things happening. Obviously, inspections being waived. That's something my wife and I said, we don't care what happens. We can wait to get a house. We are not waiving an inspection. That is just something we're not doing, whether it's an existing home or a new home. There's plenty of problems that can happen with new homes too. We drew the line there. We would not waive an inspection. One more final one, deposit, non-refundable deposit. We had a realtor suggest to us that we should consider putting down at least 50% of the home price as a deposit, as a non-refundable deposit. It was wild times. I'm not sure how much of this happens now. I'm not in the market to buy a home now, but things have turned around. There's a lot more inventory. Therefore, I would suspect that there's a lot less of that happening. There may still be a lot of people wanting homes because the people wanting homes didn't go away, but maybe there's going to be less of that madness because people have also just gotten priced out altogether. With higher interest rates, with inflation, their paychecks are getting strained in other directions, so they can't build as much of a down payment. So this will make homes a little bit more affordable. If you're in the market, you can get a bit better terms on your mortgage, and hopefully if you're going through that, it's not as crazy as it was during COVID. So then we're also going to talk about auto loans. This is another area I would say try and avoid like the plague if you can. There's been an intense effort that I've seen on social media to really normalize massive monthly payments. There would be these videos of people walking around car dealers, and they're asking the salesman at the dealer, the salesmen and women, what their monthly payment is. And everyone kind of perks up proudly, and they say their type of car and what the payment is. And these payments, I think the lowest payment I heard was $800 a month. That's absurd. You have some people say $800 a month, $1,000 a month. Some people even went as high as $1,500 a month. And they're not saying this with shame. They're not saying this as if they're embarrassed. They're saying like, yeah, that's it. That's, I was able to get that car and that's what I pay for it. And that's normal. I think that is what they're trying to do. It wasn't explicitly said in those videos, but to me, in my opinion, that was the intent. It was to normalize such ridiculous payments. And so that way, when you go in to buy a car and you decide to get a car loan, which again, I would suggest not doing that, you can talk to a salesperson and they say, oh, I have an $800 car payment. Oh, well, I have a $1,000 car payment. And it's really not that bad. They're violating the Tony Montana principle, and they're dipping into their own supply a bit when they're paying that high amount of payments. It's just crazy. So the good news is if you do intend to get a car loan, then the rates are also going to be a bit better. Now, keep in mind, with all of these interest rates that you'd be paying, the fact that they're benchmarked to the Fed funds rate is only part of the picture. The final interest rate that you're also paying will also have the credit risk associated with it. It'll factor in the credit risk. So if you have particularly bad credit, or you have a lot of outstanding loans that aren't paid or something like that, or you've had bankruptcies in the past, then in addition to whatever the Fed funds rate is, then there's the difference between that and what type of product we're talking about. So the difference between the Fed funds rate and a credit card interest rate will be huge. The difference between the Fed funds rate and a mortgage will be much smaller. So you have that difference. And then on top of that, you'll have the credit risk difference, right? So all of these places, the banks and all these financing institutions that are lending money for all these various purposes, they assess you, right, as the borrower and determine your credit risk. And then, a premium can be applied to the interest rate. And so this happens across all different types of loans, and certainly with car loans. There was a story, and before we move on from car loans, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal about how repos are going up dramatically, and they followed around repo men, which it seems like some of them are just not sleeping anymore. They are repossessing so many cars. So many people have bought way out of their range in terms of cars. Obviously, the price of cars went up dramatically, and I think people still think maybe their salaries haven't increased by the same amount, and they haven't fully put that together and realize that they cannot be living at at the same lifestyle that they used to. Whereas they probably had a car in mind, whatever make and model it was, and said, "Oh yeah, I can comfortably afford that make and model." And then 5 years later, they go and try and get that make and model, and then they have a whopping car payment to go along with it that they can't afford, and they're wondering, "Oh, geez, what happened? Why is this so bad?" It's because life has certainly gotten more expensive, and we all know that. And if your salary has not adjusted to that, you're going to be in for a rude awakening if you don't begin to trade down. But at the same time, I recognize that it is very painful to trade down. It is very painful to say, "Oh, I used to be able to afford that, but now I can't." Right? There's a recognition, almost an internal failure, a feeling of failure. Well, I must be doing something wrong because now I can no longer afford this where I used to be able to afford this. When obviously, everyone needs to have personal responsibility. I think the blame is shared also with just how the economy's been over the last several years. Things have gotten more difficult to afford. So let's see if they list any others. I think that was the last big one. So obviously what you can do, we talked about how these different products are affecting people. And so how do you avoid this, or how do you try and deal with this? Of course, avoid as many of these debts as possible, at the risk of sounding exactly like Dave Ramsey. I honestly, the richer you get, I find debt to just be more and more of a distraction. Why do I want extra paperwork? Why do I want someone else pulling something from my accounts? And I understand many of you are saying, "Oh, well, it's automatic. You don't even have to think about it." I will think about it personally, and maybe this is just a personal flaw. I will think about it. I will recognize that the money's being taken out every month, that someone has their hand in my pocket. I personally don't like that. So step one would obviously be, if you have the income, if you have a substantial income, just stop with a lot of these different forms of debt. Just stop. Just don't even bother with them. It's not worth your time. Save up, pay cash for the car, and just do that. And then obviously if you haven't done that, or if you don't have a high enough income to do that, then really you just have to try and protect yourself financially, and you have to make those painful trade downs in order to more aggressively pay off these debts to get them out of your life, or to build a substantial enough buffer that in the event if you lose a job, or you're disabled for some reason, that you could still handle these debts. And that's what happens when you have extra debts. You really have to operate with a higher buffer then, in order to handle those debt payments in the event something happens. And so why manage having a higher buffer of cash to deal with these higher expenses? Why don't you just pay it off, right? And I understand that's easier said than done for many people, but that would be where I would work toward and have worked toward. So that's our first story, right? Interest rates down 1/4 point. It's going to affect a variety of areas. And then, one more area that I'll mention is obviously the savings account. So I never view a savings account as a big money maker. You can get a high yield savings account to get a bit of a bonus over, say, what a brick and mortar place would offer you. And but those interest rates will come down too. So you won't be making as much interest on your savings account. Again, I don't view it as a big money maker. It's just a nice bonus. And by the way, interest rates on savings accounts are taxed as ordinary income anyway. So you're not even getting a benefit, whereas a dividend tax rate might be lower than your ordinary income tax rate. This interest is being rolled in there anyway. So that will come down a bit. So that's a bit of a bummer. But again, not the place that you're looking to really rapidly grow your net worth or anything like that. So that's the first story. Interest rates down a quarter point. December, we'll see what happens, and that's how it would affect the different areas of your life. So we're going to now move on to the second story, but before we do that, make sure you smash the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can get alerts every time I post and bring these business stories to you. It would be a great help. It really helps with the YouTube algorithm. I appreciate it. So let's get to the next news story. Two papers covered this. There was Bloomberg Pursuits, and The Independent also covered this story, and we'll start with Bloomberg Pursuits version. It says a skills gap is turning cleaning for the rich into a $100,000 a year job as the wealthy get wealthier and fuel a boom in luxury furnishings. Highly trained household staff are in high demand. Now, there was a similar story like this a couple years ago, and this was happening in Palm Beach as well. So for those of you that remember, several parts of the Wall Street and finance employee base moved to Florida. They relocated to Florida. They set up camp in and around Miami and Palm Beach, and they drove prices up a crazy amount down there. And they also had needs. They were very demanding, and they wanted their homes to be taken care of. I think typical homes, like if you want a standalone home in Palm Beach, the cheapest that you can probably find, last time I looked, this was maybe a year ago, is probably $3 million for a standalone home. That is not very big. That might be 1,500 square feet, right? The prices there are insane. A more typical home that some of these people might have been buying could be in the $6 or $7 million range. So we're talking about super wealthy that are able to do this, especially on a whim, to relocate and say, hey, we're done with New York. We're going to go spend $7 million on a house in Florida, right? And so obviously they have needs. They have other spending habits. And particularly this article talks about luxury furnishings. So it goes on. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, experienced housekeepers might make $60,000 a year. Now they can easily command over $100,000 here. Oh, here's the kicker, plus benefits. Rich people are richer and they're buying more delicate things. That gets back to the furnishings. He explains they want their homes to be more museum quality versus just normal stuff. So this happens, right? This can happen. When you are making a lot of money and you're investing a lot of money and your investments are doing well in addition to your job, you can start to say, well, what else can I spend this money on, right? And it's a fair question. You can't take it with you, right? There's a saying that you never see a Brinks truck following a hearse to the cemetery, right? Maybe someone's tried it, but I don't know how they would do that. I guess you just shovel in the money and coins over the casket, but you typically do not see the Brinks truck following the hearse. And so I don't blame them for spending, right? And so they're looking for ways to spend, and this could be expensive couches. This could be artwork that goes on the wall. This could be artwork, say different artifacts like sculptures or expensive, antiques that are put on display that have to be dusted and whatnot. And then also the materials that are used in the home, whether it's the counters or if it's antique furniture made of wood that has certain finishes, or if it's the floors, or if you have tile imported from somewhere and that tile has a special finish or has to be treated properly. This gets out of hand very quickly. It gets out of hand very quickly. And none of these people are going to be doing this themselves, right? Because as I think you're realizing, this sounds like a full-time job. This sounds like a full-time job to manage all of these different methods of and products used for cleaning. So another thing to point out is that not just the cleaning cost increases, but what if you want to insure any of these particular items? If they're of extreme value and you want to have an additional rider on your homeowner's policy, your homeowner's policy alone, keep in mind, is already going to be expensive if you have a $6 or $7 million house. And then it's going to be more expensive on top of that when you say, oh, well, I have belongings. If for those of you that have a home or even a renter's policy, there's the replacement cost of the home and you're paying a premium for that. But then you're also paying a premium for the physical belongings in your house to be replaced. Fortunately, that part of my policies has always been small. I think my newest TV is at least 10 years old. So it's not been an issue for me, but it's clearly an issue for these people. So it's going to create extra insurance costs, the cleaning costs, which we talked about, and the maintenance. I've read up on stoves recently, and there's the really high end. You get a Thermador stove, you get a Wolf stove, and these supposedly heat a lot better. They light quicker. They're more professional, right? What have you? I'm sure there's a bunch of things that's so much better about them that I just don't understand. But those stoves apparently need more maintenance. There's more complex parts with them. We hear the same thing with foreign cars, say Mercedes and whatnot. They need to be serviced. I heard Doug DeMuro talk about how German cars, if the service light goes on, you better get to the dealer and get it serviced. That is a finely tuned machine. Nothing can go wrong. If it's time for a service, it must be taken care of. Otherwise, it's going to cause problems. Whereas he said brands like Toyota really thought more about the American market and thought that most Americans aren't going to rush in to get it serviced. So regardless, the car will keep running for several thousand miles with that service light on. So thank you to Toyota for that, if that's really the case. But obviously Mercedes, Porsches, a lot more expensive than Toyotas. And so they have this extra maintenance. Think about luxury watches that you have to have sent out to special watchmakers and craftsmen that know how to care for that particularly and maintain that. And then we mentioned luxury cars. So there's a lot that goes in to once you get something that's nice, that's not the end of the story. And there's a quote here, like I mentioned, there's a similar article from The Independent. They have a quote that says, some of the people that we're talking about here are just now realizing that the price of such statement pieces, whether it be that luxury couch, rug, painting, car, whatever, tile, imported tile, the price of such statement pieces do not stop after point of purchase, right? It keeps going. These things need to be maintained, and they make a similar point about many people wanting these homes to be museum quality. So, yikes, what can we take away from this? Yeah, definitely consider all of the costs associated with owning that item long term. When I'm buying an item, do you know the most important things now? It's not price. Obviously, I don't want price to be exorbitantly high, but it's not price that I look at. I try and understand the quality. Is this something that's going to be of good quality? And will it last me without a lot of maintenance? Those are things that I like to buy now. If I can buy something that will do its job with no maintenance or anything for 50 years, then I'm a buyer. Then I'm a buyer for that. If it'll last 50 years, and still do whatever it was supposed to do, right? Whether this is a car, obviously that's absurd, but a car, or some shirt that'll just last forever, or even if it's a new floor in your house, if it's extra durable or something. That's what I'm interested in buying. I do not want to fall into this. Just because you have a high income doesn't mean you have to fall in this. I understand you want to start buying nicer things, but be careful. Do not get on the slippery slope, and then all of a sudden you're having to pay a housekeeper $100,000 because you have 40 cleaning products for 40 different services, and you have to be careful about dusting and polishing and sending things out to be maintained. It sounds like a headache. In fact, it sounds like a job to then manage all of the people managing all of all of these belongings. And I guess that's where house managers come in, which God knows what they cost. So anyway, that's the last story. Be careful if you have a high income. Do not fall into this trap, unless you like to be bothered by the nuances of everyday things. Then good luck to you. Have a good night.